Good morning, Vietnam. Here I am back again. I hope you've enjoyed my earlier videos. Today, we're going to talk about diet. As I've mentioned a few times, I've been a 95% vegetarian the last 50 years. I'm 72 years old and pretty fit. As I've said in my last podcast, I switched from doing weight training, which I've only been doing for a couple of years, to boxing and calisthenics only for the last 6 months, and thoroughly enjoying it. My whole body's changed. I put on 1.5 kilograms of muscle. But today we are talking about diet, and I'm going to do a full comparison on the Blue Zone, the 5 locations. I'm going to compare all their diets with my own, and also of the village I was born in the mountains of northern Greece. And you'll be able to do an easy comparison of all these diets. One of the biggest differences is that my diet has 0 sugar, and 2, I found a few discrepancies, I believe, and that has to do with fish consumption. I talk about it when I do discuss the table later in this podcast, but mainly that the fish consumption is very low in Sardinia and very low in Okinawa, or 0, and 6% in Ikaria, Greece. I mean, this is a bit ridiculous. There has been a number of podcasts that have talked about the discrepancies and probably errors in the Blue Zone diets, and maybe even their longevity. I'm not too concerned with that. I'm taking it as mostly correct. The information on the internet on Blue Zones by the author, I believe, Mr. Belcher. But first, I'm going to talk about just a few things. I do expand further on the Harvard trial they did on 24 identical twins. And the reason for that was to eliminate the genetic factor. So I've referenced that below and also talk about it more later in this podcast. Also, I just watched a video by Dr. Ken Barry, who has his own podcast, and he was interviewing a woman called Mary Ruddick. And to tell you, I was supremely disappointed in the interview and also what Miss Ruddick said. I'm going to go through it quickly. One thing she says, she found in the jungles of, I think it was South America, or Africa, I'm not sure. She says that the population doesn't eat fruit if they live in the jungles, which is absolutely a silly claim. I mean, I live in tropical Vietnam, and there's abundant fruit everywhere, all the time, all year round. And also, she might forget that wine has been in production for 8,000 years. And originally they found traces of it in Georgia first, then Iran, then Greece, then Armenia, and then Sicily, 6,000 years ago. So people have been eating grapes for 8,000 years. I eat a ton of fruit. Why is it that all the data today is that the more fruit and vegetables you eat, the longer you live? All the data says that. So it is such a silly claim. And she says the fruit, there's so little of it in the jungles that most of it gets eaten by the animals anyway. I mean, it's so silly. 2, she talks about her latest expedition into indigenous tribes, and she went up to northern Norway and looked at the Sami tribe, or the Sami people, the indigenous group in the northern area that goes through northern Sweden and northern Russia. And I looked them up, and I actually found a study that compared the study compared 3 categories. One was the Samis that herded reindeer, the others were Samis who did not herd reindeer, and the other was included the peoples that live around the Samis but were not Sami. And from what I read, the Samis who eat reindeer were the most healthy. Their diseases and their death by certain diseases were much less than the other 2 groups. But their average lifespan was only 75 years, which ranks them around 100 on the world scale of longevity. Not so great. All the reports I've seen of major meat eaters that consume almost zero vegetables and fruit live short lives. The 2 classic examples is the Maasai tribe in Eastern Africa, I think Kenya, and also the Bushmen of the Kalahari in South Africa. The Maasai men live to be 50, and the women only 45. And it seems like, from what I read, it's because of the misogyny of the men. But the Kalahari Bushmen, the men and women live to about 50. If you look at the blue zone, and any Mediterranean diet in fact, almost so many Mediterranean people live over 80. So that's 66% longer life if you eat fruit and vegetables. She also discredits the blue zone, she claims to have gone to all the blue zones, but when I listened to her, she said she went to visit them, but she lived in the nearby town or city and then go up to visit them maybe 2 days a week or at least 1 day a week. I mean, how do you conclude whether the published data is correct from 1 day a week? You don't observe them the whole week or the whole month. Their diet varies. My personal diet, I am going to tell you now, because I'm re-recording the first part. I wasn't happy with it. For breakfast, I have oats, half an apple. I put olive oil on it. Sometimes I put yogurt on it, or most of the time. For lunch, I either have half a can of beans or lentils, or a full avocado if it's smaller, and if it's a large avocado, only half. With lunch, I either have bread or these German biscuits, dry biscuits, either with celery or with tomatoes and cucumbers. In the afternoon, around 3, I have a large handful of nuts. And for dinner, 2 to 3 times a week, I have tofu with rice and vegetables. 2 times a week, I have pasta with salad. And 2 times a week, I have baked potato fries, again with salad. Liberal amounts of oil, olive oil on everything. And then around 8 p.m. I eat some more fruit. And all of it's quite varied. All the vegetables are varied, all the fruits are varied, depending on what's available down at the market, or especially on the street, which I found a couple of guys that sell me great fruit. So that's my typical diet. And now I'll introduce to you now back to an analysis of the Harvard Twins diet, which was done by, there was a report or a critique done by Dr. Gil Carvalho. His podcast is Nutrition Made Simple. So I will switch over to the original recording. Thank you. One of the best guys that I have seen on the internet, Dr. Gil Carvalho. His podcast is called Nutrition Made Simple. And I'm going to refer to his podcast called Scientist Fact Checks New Netflix Diet Documentary, Vegan versus Omnivore Twins. And basically from that conclusion that there is some significant difference, and I'm going to reference that, or he references that documentary as well, but anyway, basically the findings from that is, and I'm going to read from it, in this randomized clinical trial of 22 healthy adult identical twin pairs, those consuming a healthy vegan diet showed significantly improved low-density lipoprotein cholesterol concentration, fasting insulin level, and weight loss compared with twins consuming a healthy omnivorous diet. Meaning, the findings from this trial suggest that a healthy plant-based diet offers a significant protective cardiometabolic advantage compared with a healthy omnivorous diet. So, again, I'm not against meat per se, but there's so much data that shows that vegetarianism is more healthy and you live longer. I'm going to also reference other podcasts. Like there's a silly one from a guy called Felix Harder. Is mental illness a vitamin deficiency? Wow. I mean, some people just, I guess they can't get enough clicks on their podcasts that they have to research this or make these wild statements. I also did a podcast being very negative towards Dr. Mike, and one of his people in his three-way conversation talked about she likes to make smoothies with fruit. One thing she forgets, and she's a nutritional expert, is that chewing is a big part of your stomach health. And that's why I don't recommend smoothies or juices. I don't do them. Very rarely do I do a juice. So I've included that. It's called The Importance of Chewing Food. Now, another podcast I'm going to include, yes, it is a podcast. It's called the name of the podcast is Analyze and Optimize. And this guy did some research on what was the diet in the 40s and 50s during the war and after the war, World War II. And it's called Everyone Used to Be Thin. Here's what they really ate. And his conclusion was, can I get my notes on this? Well, first of all, their calorie intake was at least 3,000 and 3,500, and they even ate quite a lot of sugar, refined white sugar. So what changed? Now, he doesn't offer any proof, but basically I'm going to quote from his conclusions what's happening today, and why we're eating much less calories and getting much more sick and living unhealthy lives. One is our metabolism has been totally compromised. And why? The quality of the animal fats has dropped significantly. There's the pollutants in our food, in the air. We spend much less time outdoors, getting exercise, fresh air, and I guess vitamin D. There's how many thousands and thousands of different chemicals in our foods today. And in fact, you can't even buy any food, even though I buy organic food, it's still totally contaminated, but nowhere near the extent of food grown with fertilizers, chemical fertilizers. Again, I just mentioned being exposed to different types of lights, being outside. There's a completely different light to the ones that we are indoors. And of course, we get a lot of sweeteners in our foods, especially corn, high fructose corn syrup, and so many foods. Now, I eat 0 foods that are processed. 0. I don't know how people have got lost in eating processed foods. About 30 years ago, I read an article about just when frozen pizzas came out, and this guy was interviewed, and they asked him, why do you eat frozen pizzas? It said there's no nutritional value in it. He said, well, it tastes good. And I think that's what's happened as fast food and chemical food, high processed foods have come into play. One of the experts on cancer, Dr. Thomas Seyfried, he's an expert in biology, genetics, and biochemistry. He says the same thing, basically. You can't expect to be healthy and your body to be healthy and not get disease if you eat processed foods. Now, we'll get to what I really want to talk about, and I know that's a long preamble, is the Blue Zone diets. After I talk about them in general terms, I prepared a table and listed the different countries and compared it to what I recall my village diet, because it changed so much after we went to Australia and we ate much more meat. And also my current diet, which I basically had, and it's very, very little in the last 50 years. But the biggest difference is I've been eating over the last, I would say 30 years, I've been eating a lot more tofu. And that's it, tofu. That's the biggest difference, and also eating a lot less bread. I do eat pasta, spaghetti twice a week, and grate Parmigiana cheese on it. And I do eat some tofu cheese these days. So, the blue zones. As I said, I prepared the table, and I will discuss that table after I finish talking in generalities about the blue zones. I will have to refer to my notes. I can't remember, of course, everything. There's so much similarities between them. It's not even funny. When you look at that chart, if you want to study that chart more in detail, but I'll go over the general things. Loma Linda in California, they are a religious group of people, and they are Seventh-day Adventists, me being totally not religious, and none of the other areas refer to religion. Dr. Gundry, who I discussed in my anti-Dr. Mike podcast, he actually, I don't know if he's a Seventh-day Adventist, but he said in that podcast that he lived there a long time. And of course, Dr. Mike didn't discuss it in almost any detail. One thing Dr. Gundry said in that discussion was that, which I didn't know, is that they get about 10% of their fat from cheese. I would have liked to know what type of cheese and the source of the milk and so forth. They do exercise more conventionally. Well, that's not the right word. They exercise more. They do go for walks, of course, but they do use the gym a lot. They also spend a lot of time resting and relaxing. And they are, being Seventh-day Adventists, non-smokers, and also Seventh-day Adventists are more or less vegetarians, but they do show on the internet that they consume about 4% of their diet in meat and poultry and 1% in fish. So they're not true vegetarians. But they do eat a lot of nuts. Going on to Sardinia, Italy. Very similar, except their whole grains is very high, and they eat a lot of bread and a lot of pasta, obviously. And also pecorino cheese, which is sheep's milk. It's not cow's milk, made from. They do eat significant vegetables. Almost all, I'm looking at my table, almost all of these places, except Okinawa, have added sugars in their diets. The least being Loma Linda, 1%. Sorry, Okinawa have 0. Loma Linda has 1%, and Costa Rica has the highest at 11%. And I believe that's from their consumption of cane sugar. I don't know how they consume it. You obviously can't have too much sugar if you chew cane, but they do consume a lot. The Sardinians do a lot of gardening and walking. They have again, all of these have strong family and community networks. They do drink some wine. They drink goat's milk. And they do have, with the goat's milk, of course, there must be, especially the men, they must be sheep herders. And it's hard to get exactly what area of Sardinia they live in, but my assumption is that there are more mountain folk like myself, and that's where the sheep graze is in the hills, not in the flat areas of the island. So the quality of the milk is very high. Now, there's a weird statistic with the Sardinians, is that the men live 7 years longer than the women, which is almost, it doesn't occur almost anywhere in the world. The one thing, again, I'll refer back to Dr. Gundry, who makes some outrageous, outlandish claims. But he thinks one of the reasons is because the men smoke. And there's a possibility that's true, because nicotine definitely has some advantages for your health. But only nicotine, not all the other chemicals they put in the tobacco, and your lungs must. I've seen photographs of lungs from people who have smoked a lot, and they're basically black. But there could be some truth in that. Going to Costa Rica, again, they are also, I believe, sheep herders. All the rest of the items I've written down, they're very, very similar. Their personal beliefs is they believe in the greater good. So they have very, very strong community, like the other first two places I talked about. They do spend a lot of time outside. And of course, being in Central America or south, anywhere south of the US, there's a high consumption of beans. When I was living in LA for a very long time, go to a Mexican restaurant, and of course, there was always beans on the menu. And they eat a lot of maize, corn. Going on to Okinawa in Japan, they have a similar thing, a purpose in life. That's why they wake up. They need to do something, prove themselves in some way, communicate with the people around them. They do a lot of gardening. They also grow a lot of medicinal herbs. And of course, they eat a lot of fermented foods, which I do as well. And even growing up as a Greek, we ate some fermented foods. Soy, obviously. And they also like to spend times outside. Now, with soy, there are different other products. I can't find them quickly in my notes. I'm not going to look it up right now. Then we switch to Ikaria, the island of Ikaria in Greece. They also do a lot of hillside walking. The men apparently smoke also, but they don't live longer than the women. They also have a lot of goats on the island, so they're eating high quality, or drinking high quality milk, and the feta cheese is made from high quality goat's milk. Basically, it's the classic Mediterranean diet. They also fast a little. I think that's more the religious thing. If you don't know, Greek Orthodox is very, very similar to Catholicism, and Russian Orthodox. They do drink some herbal teas, and they also take a nap in the afternoons, like I do. Moving on to, that is the 5 countries. I would like to say I do eat a lot of onion and garlic almost every day. Definitely onion every day, either raw in salad or I occasionally bite a raw garlic. But definitely cook with garlic when we prepare tofu. My girlfriend cooks with ginger and garlic. I occasionally cook the tofu. Fermented foods, I think, and yogurt. I do eat yogurt regularly, nearly every day. Tofu, soy sauce, and oyster sauce. So I get a little bit of fermented foods nearly every day. And I think that really improves your gut microbiome. So now I'm going to switch and talk about the chart I assembled, put together, and in detail, and compare all the numbers to my current diet. So here we go. We're going to try it out again with the correct thing. Here we have a table. You can see on the left side there's the 5 locations of the blue zones, and also at the bottom there's Griva, Greece, the village I was born in, and below that is my diet, which means my diet. Also in 3 locations I've got question marks. 2 are on the Sardinia horizontal line, and I have question marks against pasta on the vertical column, and I've written 5% because in the pie diagram, when you look up blue zones on the internet for Sardinia, it doesn't have any pasta, which is absolutely ridiculous considering how much pasta Italians eat almost every day. Also on that horizontal line, under fish, there's no value. How can there be no value? A percentage of fish eaten, daily, weekly, whatever, on an island. Also, under Icaria, Greece, on the column dairy, I have written 6%. Greeks eat feta cheese daily, not maybe. So I don't know why that's been omitted. It does bring in question some of these numbers and the accuracy of the blue zone data. But we're not going to get into that. I'm going to assume they're reasonably correct. And you can see on the left side, most of the way down, there's average written. And you can see for the different foods what the average for the 5 blue zone areas are. Now, this is just a guideline. I'm not taking it to mean anything significant, at least. I'm looking at my diet compared to it. You can see that under whole grains, under rice, I am eating around 5% of by weight of the food I consume per day. Now, I don't consume rice every day, but this is an average over a week. And also whole grains, I've listed 5%, which is basically bread. And you can see that it compares much below the average of whole grains. I don't eat a lot of bread. The next column is pasta, and compared to the average, I eat more. I eat pasta at least twice a week. And you can see in my hometown that pasta is eaten about the same. And also in my hometown, under whole grains, I listed 35% because Greeks eat bread with everything. So that's an estimate, but growing up in the family meals, we had literally a loaf of bread for dinner every night. That was just dinner. Lunch, I nearly always ate bread for lunch, either at home or at school. And in those days, we did not have school lunches. So I used to take a bread sandwich. And in the morning, nearly always consumed bread as well as toast. You can see the average under dairy is 13%, but my diet is limited to dairy. I have a little bit of milk in my coffee every day, and also I eat feta cheese maybe twice a week to supplement the carbohydrate intake when I'm eating legumes. And I do that because I've always eaten feta cheese with legumes growing up, and if I get lost with food, or always have, not knowing what to eat, I go back to my original hometown village diet. The next column is vegetables, and you can see that varies greatly from the different blue zones, with a massive 33% in Loma Linda, and in Okinawa you can see 67%, but that is sweet potato. Now, obviously they have other vegetables, and I've written that under the same column under other veg. And below that, in Ikaria, they eat a lot of greens as well, so do I. Potatoes 9%, and other veggies 16%. So that's 39%. And you can see in all the blue zones, there's a high intake of vegetables. I eat a lot. You can see in my horizontal line under my diet, I eat 32% vegetables and around 7% potatoes, about twice a week. Now, I eat potatoes as a whole meal. I don't eat it with anything, just salad. Added sugars is the next column, and we can see that in Nicoya, Costa Rica, it's 11%, very high. I don't eat any added sugars. Once in a blue moon, I might buy some dark chocolate. Otherwise, it's pretty consistent through there. In Nicoya, in Costa Rica, it's 11%, and I think that's due to cane sugar. That is my guess. Under the next column, fruits, we can see that Loma Linda, by far, it's a lot of fruits. I'm surprised in Sardinia it's only 1%. In Nicoya, it's tropical climate, they're eating 9%. In Ikaria, in Greece, it's 16%, and the average is 11%. We're not showing any fruit in Okinawa, which I'm surprised. In my hometown, I would say around 5%. It could be a bit higher depending on the season, of course. Our village does get very cold in winter, and I'm sure nothing like any type of fruit can grow in that climate. I eat about 21% fruits. I eat half an apple every morning with my oatmeal, and then have around 100 grams of some other fruit, which varies every day, depending what I can buy, either from the store or on the street. The next column is legumes. You can see it's pretty consistent throughout the whole 5 blue zones, my hometown, and also my personal choices. But I mix it up a lot. I eat tofu for dinner at least twice a week, and for lunch I have, I would say, 60 to 80 grams of either some form of bean or lentils. But when I do eat the beans or lentils, as I said, I do eat feta cheese with it a little bit. Under the egg column, I eat probably 2 eggs a week. You can see that I've written down, from what I recall, in my hometown, it's about 2%, and also 2% in Nicoya. And again, I'm surprised in Sardinia they don't eat, there's nothing listed as under eggs. Added fats, you can see it's very consistent, around 2%, except for Okinawa. I'm sure they have some oil, but maybe under 1%. In Icaria, Greece, and my hometown and my diet, I use olive oil for cooking only, and also I put on my salads, and I also put it on my oatmeal for breakfast. It could be a little low, could be maybe as high as 3%. The Italy, it's also 2%. Okay. Next column is meat and poultry. You can see that's very consistent. I've got 0 for myself. We had chicken the other day because we got it from my girlfriend's hometown. They just run wild up there. So it's very natural fed chicken. But I haven't listed it because we have it fairly rarely. Fish, it's another strange column. In Icaria, I've listed it at 6% because there's no way they're not eating a lot of fish on a small island like Icaria. Sardinia, as I said, I'm very surprised. There's no fish listed on their pie chart. Loma Linda, 1%, and I've listed 1% in my village. It's probably less than that because you have to wait for the fishmonger or some sort of fish truck to come all the way up the mountain and sell the fish. Next column is nuts and seeds. Only Loma Linda eats 2%, and I think that all the other locations do eat some nuts and seeds, but not significant. I grew up eating some nuts and seeds, and I've listed 1.5% on my diet because I eat cashews, a large handful of cashews every afternoon for a snack when I drink my fruit tea. Final columns just to show you that they all add up correctly to 100%. So you can see, if you look at it more closely, my diet is reasonably close to what I was eating when I was growing up. But the closest it resembles, in fact, is the Loma Linda diet, which is a Western vegetarian diet, basically. And that is what it seems like I have ended up as well, with tofu twice a week. You can see they also eat a lot of legumes. I eat a little bit more because of the tofu. And otherwise, most of the other items between myself and Loma Linda are very, very close. So I've adjusted my diet to a Western vegetarian diet. Okay, so you can see from my discussion of the chart that, as I mentioned, my diet is very much so Westernized Mediterranean diet, as in Loma Linda's diet. I want to add that I also did an analysis of my calorie intake and protein intake. As I mentioned in the exercise video, I now consume around 1,700 calories per day. Gone up from around 1,200 before I started exercising strenuously. I do eat a bit more, mainly rice and pasta, spaghetti. My protein intake is probably around 80 grams per day. And of course that's fortified, as I said, by a large handful of nuts every day. The recommended protein intake per kilogram of your weight is around 0.8 grams per kilogram. That means I need about minimum 50 grams per day, but I'm eating around 80 at maximum. And that's one of the reasons I said in the exercise video that once you lose muscle mass and you get in your late 60s and 70s, it's almost impossible to put back on. You have to eat a much higher protein intake than you need and also exercise way too strenuously. I'll also quote from the WHO, the American Heart Association, and the European Cardiovascular Group Association, whatever they're called, that if you want to reduce stroke by 80%, these are the 7 main risks. 1, tobacco. 2, alcohol. 3, exercise. Obviously exercise, not less exercise, more exercise. Eat less meat, and I advocate actually 0 sugar, refined sugar. Do not be overweight. Try and lower your blood pressure and lower your cholesterols. So those 7 things are what they recommend if you want to decrease your chances by 80% of stroke. So to summarize the blue zone areas, I've written down, number 1, they all do natural exercise. Now you can be somebody like me who's a little crazy and want to have a very lean body and continue to exercise more strenuously and take up something like boxing, which I really thoroughly enjoy at the moment. 2 is to belong to a community. I've never really felt that way. I've been a loner half my adult life. I think it's more important how you control the stress in your life. I do agree that being in some form of community is a great thing. It just never worked out for me. Or a religious community, as long as you don't go overboard like the the nuts in America at the moment, the religious right, you know, there's a saying that you will become who your peers are, and you need to belong to the right peer group, your right tribe, people who have similar lifestyles. Excuse me. For example, if you hang out with fat people, you will get fat. If you hang out long enough with people who smoke, you'll end up smoking. So you have to choose your peer group and your people around you very carefully if you want to live a healthy, long life. Have a purpose in life. I can't say at my age and what I'm doing today is have a purpose in life other than to get healthy and enjoy going to the boxing gym 3 times a week now. I really enjoy watching Korean dramas and Korean movies especially. Spend maybe 4 hours a day doing this. Before that, living with a purpose, because of my age now, I don't think I'm going to get another full-time job at least. I'm trying to develop other areas where I can work in, start my own businesses, I hope, before it's too late, whatever that means. I have been looking for work. My last job was 2.5 years ago, full-time job as an architectural designer, specializing in high-rise buildings. Also, I do take a nap every day. I started doing it 10, 11 years ago. In LA, my last year in LA, I was waiting to sell my the house I just built and finished, but it took me a year to sell it. So I used to take naps every day. I had some work, but not a lot. Another thing is, don't eat until you're full. It just makes no sense. Somewhere below that, you know when you've had enough. It's becoming in touch with your body and knowing when you are totally sated. I see many people, my second wife, we went to a restaurant once, very expensive restaurant, and they have free cheese platter afterwards. I mean, she just couldn't help herself. She ate as much cheese, she ate more cheese than all the other meal put together. I mean, she just went nuts. I also eat a very high fiber diet. Every meal I have has quite a bit of fiber in it. A lot of vegetables, a lot of fruit. I think you need all this to get the essential or critical vitamins and minerals out of vegetables and fruit that you do not get out of carbohydrates and proteins and fats. I'm not going to talk about longevity today. I'm going to leave that for another video. Thanks for listening. I hope you find this information, especially the collating of all the blue zone areas, as I find it fascinating, and that find your own diet. Find what works for you. Find what gives you strength, mental strength, emotional strength, and physical strength. And you will live a long, healthy life. Take care. See you in the next one.